Call the meeting to order. This is a special town council work session. We'll have a silent roll call and we'll have the pledge of allegiance, which Kevin, would you lead us in the pledge? Okay, just say aye.
Just
That's
say
all.
aye.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, today we have a presentation discussion regarding long-range forecast and potential impacts on utility rates. Sherry, would you introduce our subject matter experts?
I would be happy to do so, Mayor. That's as far as it reaches. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So we are here today to go over the preliminary information and impacts from our utility rate study on the long-range forecast. We have with us today Kevin Burnett with Willdan. We have Jim Rounds from Rounds Consulting. He's got with him Luis Cordova, who has been helping with a lot of this. We have Jim Strickland from Columbia Capital. Online, we have Kaylin Dwyer from Columbia Capital and Pat Walker from Pat Walker Consulting online. So,
Wow.
yes, this has been a very big set of projects that are all very interrelated. So, Brian, do you see the presentations out there? So I forget what I called it. The oh, right back. So this is very much hot off the press. And we have some copies on their way for you as well. So as I mentioned, so these are very interrelated projects that we have. And so the utility rate study update that back in October, the council had approved. We have been seeing some things and felt like that it was time to do that rate update. If you could go to the next slide, Brian. And so what it is it's really very preliminary information for today's discussion on policy. So the impacts of the policy decisions will impact the long range forecast for the general fund because of the subsidies that we've been having, and we'll go through all of that information. The debt financing plan. So it is also preliminary information based off of what's been being developed for the proposed CIP plan for this next budget process. As you know, we had the integrated utilities master plan and a lot of projects and things added there. And then with the long range forecast, so there are some scenario options that we'll be looking at based off of information coming from the rate study and looking at recessionary and non-recessionary projections, although there's a more pessimistic one, and even in the baseline one, I believe there are some recessionary estimations in there. So there have been a lot of changes since the last time that the council had seen a long range forecast that Jim Rounds had worked on, which is why we wanted him to participate again. And so it's things that we have seen showing up that seem to be issues that we wanted to have an update on all of this information. Since that long range forecast, there have been the impacts of COVID inflationary increases. And I think most people know some of those inflationary increases were pretty significant that have occurred. Since then, also the pavement management program, there was a decision that wanted to accelerate projects and getting those things done. So that was not part of the plan at the time the last long range forecast was done. At the time of the last long-range forecast. It was thought that the subsidies and loan to the utility funds from the general fund would no longer be needed at that point, and yet they have needed to continue. And as I mentioned, so we have the 2023 Integrated Utilities Master Plan, which was very significant in the number of projects. And then, of course, there's been things that have been arisen related to water resources and some concerns about how much water delivery we'll get, how much it will cost for water resources to help fill any gaps that we need. So there are a lot of things that are different in the world of what happened for town of Cave Creek since the last version.
Just for clarification, when
Yes.
was the last version? Which year?
So I think it was around 2020, 2021-ish when it was being put together. I think the presentation was in 2021, but put together in 2020. So part of the goals of what we're trying to achieve here, part of it is maintaining the town's fiscal sustainability. So there have been increases compared to what the original forecast said related to fire department costs, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to cover those costs. And of course, the costs will continue to increase just because of inflationary impacts. The non-utility CIP projects, the funding comes from primarily the general fund. There are times we get grants and other resources related to all of that, but we want to make sure that we have the fiscal sustainability to cover those. And we want to eliminate the reliance of the utilities on general fund subsidies and the loans and such. And it is a ARS requirement that those funds be self-supporting. So we also want to be in compliance with that. But from a fiscal sustainability, it's a very good idea for them to be self-supporting. So I wanted to kind of cover a little bit of what some of the information was that we have provided to the consultants. We have been able to provide to them preliminary information of what we're estimating for fiscal year 25 and what has been requested for the 26 budget. It's a process involved in putting together budget information. And so there are a few little changes here and there that are being made, but what they have of the preliminary numbers are materially correct. And then also we provide a historical information. So historical revenues, expenditures, fund balances. Part of what also Rounds Consulting looked at was TPT revenue. They wanted the by category information because the different categories will change at different rates. There's construction, there's retail, there's accommodation, there's all the various categories related to that change differently. And then also some of the information that is really future related. So we provide them the preliminary information that we have for the 5-year CIP plan. And one of the things that was also something we identified as future amounts is the ongoing reimbursements from the Cave Creek Rodeo Association for the Skybox. So including those, we will be receiving payments through 2031 from them. Also, there was some accounting structural changes that we had talked about during the council retreat in February that have been incorporated into the information. So we had talked about that we are changing what was once called the HERF fund into really a true streets fund, that all the streets costs would be in that fund. And so pulling streets costs out of general fund, putting them in the streets fund. So that results instead of expenditures in the general fund, more of transfers for the balancing in the streets fund. We had also talked about creating a trails fund. There's the 100,000 from the half cent that goes to Spur Cross. The ordinance says that whatever's left over of the TPT half cent that goes to the Spur Cross Fund, 100,000 goes to trails. And then the remainder is split 50-50 between the general fund and the water infrastructure fund. So we created Trails Fund to be able to track those resources. It is requiring additional transfer from the general fund in order to keep it whole. And then creating the Capital Improvements Fund. Instead of having CIP projects in the general fund, tracking those separately in a capital improvements fund, designating capital reserve specifically to that. It was one of the things that I had mentioned that the state does look at the financials of the cities and towns, and when you're showing large balances that don't seem to be designated for anything, that raises issues with them. And having money in a capital improvements fund is part of what solves that. The pavement preservation program was put I'm not sure exactly when, but a few years ago, it was changed from operating to CIP, and we're moving it back to operating because it's really not CIP. It's more pavement preservation maintenance program, and it's not really truly capital. So that's going back to operating costs. So it's not on CIP plan. The cost allocations that we're doing, that we're starting for the utility funds, where there was attempts at trying to direct code some of the costs to the utility funds, but instead we're using a methodology of cost allocations where you look at things such as number of FTEs, which was our primary thing that we used, or their percentage of the budget or percentage of invoices issued, things like that. So it's kind of like overhead in a corporate world, but in governmental, we don't use the term overhead. We use the term indirect costs and cost allocation. Also, what was provided was setting up of equipment replacement reserves. And so being able to replace the equipment, but also we wanted to make sure that we were accumulating monies for the fire vehicles. So the station one that we have, so we have the fire engine and the water tanker truck that in about 10 years would need to be replaced. So we want to make sure that we're building up monies to be able to do that. And then the regional station that is expected to come online, I think, December of this year. So they are getting the first engine, but we are getting the second engine, so the replacement engine. So building that into the equipment replacement reserve. So those are some of the things that we had provided to them to make sure that they incorporated those costs into the plan. So looking at the CIP aspect for the utilities, some of the preliminary assumptions that we have, and we will be looking for any discussion that you may want to have related to assumptions that have been made and policy direction of what you would like to see. So the priorities for CIP were identified based off of what was in the integrated utility master plan. And then we asked Sean, when we had the first go around of the numbers, we said, okay, is there anything that you can do of pushing some of these projects out? What projects do you think realistically could even be completed? Because maybe they can't all be completed at the same time, because it just was not affordable the way that we were originally looking at the numbers. And so Sean did take a second look, did some smoothing of the financial impacts on those projects. So that definitely helped with that. We also have included in the CIP plan some placeholders related to water resources. So we do have placeholder in there for the Bartlett Dam project. I do know that it is questionable at this point in time of beyond the study that's happening, would we participate in the construction or not? That decision hasn't been really discussed or made, but we did include those numbers in there in case that is what council decides to do. We also have placeholder for Colorado River water rights, and then some of the other potential water resources that are being explored. We have costs for those as well. As far as TPT revenue, so this does not incorporate any change to how TPT revenues are allocated at this point in time. It assumes that we're continuing with what we've been doing. So there's the 1/2 cent that is for utilities that has always been going into the wastewater fund, because the wastewater fund is the one that had the most need. And so the modeling assumes that 1/2 cent would continue to go to wastewater. It's approximately $2 million in the estimate that I have for fiscal year 26. The other half cent for Spur Cross. So there's the half cent of whatever's left of Spur Cross. There's the 100,000 that goes to the Trails Fund, and then 50-50 between General Fund and the Water Infrastructure Fund. The Water Infrastructure Fund really is simply feeding to the Cave Creek Water Fund. So that's going to be one of the changes that I'm proposing, that we just roll it in to Cave Creek Water. And so there's the assumption that that would continue as well. And so the amount that's going into Cave Creek Water via water infrastructure, the estimate for fiscal year 26 is 977,000. Some things on debt financing, some of the assumptions that we preliminarily have in the plan right now. So any of the proposed studies, assessments, things that lead to capital projects like the master plan, the integrated utilities master plan was considered a CIP project, even though it's not capital in and of itself, but it leads to capital. So those are things that we don't debt finance. So they're not included in the debt financing plan, but basically all other utility CIP costs, we built into having them debt financed. The assumptions are based off of a 20-year repayment term at 5% interest. One of the things that Jim Strickland from Columbia Capital made sure that, to mention was that the markets right now are pretty volatile. So there's no real guarantee on what the rates would be when we get to the point of wanting to issue the first set of debt for these projects. So it's just for the modeling purposes. We said, yeah, we're fine with the 5%. The 20-year repayment term was something that we had asked for. However, it is also something that the new WIFA board, they've had some turnover on their board, is saying that they now will only consider a 30-year term on an exception basis. They're really going to limit it to the 20 years. So that is essentially what we're seeing.
Mayor and council, if I may, you have these being passed out to you, and they're making additional copies so the public that are here will get these as well.
The in the way that the debt was structured, we were assuming that the actual payments on the debt wouldn't actually start occurring on the principal, would be deferred for 2 years, similar to what was done with the loan for the Phoenix Interconnect project. The assumptions include that debt service requirements are met. So in order to do the loans through WIFA based off of pledges of utility revenue, we have to have a minimum of 1.2 times coverage, and to have the debt service reserve fund requirement waived, we have to have at least 1.5 times of the utility revenue. So we've taken that into consideration of when do we need debt service reserves, when do we not need them? And if we end up saying that we want to use excise tax to pledge for these loans, not to use it to repay them, but to use it as part of the pledge, then it would be 2.5 times coverage for that. So most of the WIFA loans right now are with utility revenue, but there are a couple of WIFA loans that the town did use excise tax as the pledge for those. Also, based off of the estimations that Sean has provided for the Phoenix Interconnect project, there would be about $2 million left on the WIFA loan. And WIFA has said that they would consider repurposing that $2 million for some of these other projects. So it is at a very low interest rate because of the environment when those documents were signed in, that rate was locked in at that particular time. And so it would be nice to be able to keep that low interest rate on that 2 million.
Does that mean that the Phoenix Interconnect will not require any general fund money?
No, there's no general fund money that's been put towards it. There's money from the Water Infrastructure Fund that has been applied. There is a grant, the congressionally directed spending money, that was awarded, that would go towards this, and WIPLO money.
And there's been no talk of not giving us that congressionally directed money. Is that so far firm that we're gonna get that money?
I think we're pretty good on that.
Okay.
There's been no discussion of not getting it. Okay. So the debt numbers that we included in the models for the utilities. So the modeling goes out to 2034 for the utilities. Right now, currently the outstanding amount for wastewater is 7.7 million that would be paid off in 2029. The new debt that we're talking about issuing would be at the highest balance because the way we factored in was how much would it be in each one of the fiscal years during the plan. So we would hit the highest level of the balance at 13.1 million in 2034. The current debt service payment for wastewater is 1.9 million. For the new debt portion, that would be 1.2 million, would be the highest of the debt payment by the time we get to all of those amounts issued for years 2037 through 2047. Looking at Cave Creek Water, so the current amount outstanding, 18.4 million, and that does include the Phoenix Interconnect loan. And because the Phoenix Interconnect loan was set at a 30-year term, so the final payment on the current debt would be 2053. The new debt, so 35.2 million, and 2032 would be that highest balance on the new debt being added. Debt service payments currently at 2.6 million, including the payment that we'll be starting to make for the WIFA loan. The new debt highest payment amount, 3.2 million in years 2035 through 2046. Desert Hills Water, current outstanding amount, 2.8 million, payoff in 2028. The new debt adding the highest amount at 10 million in 2032. The current debt payment amount at 1 million. The new debt, the highest amount that it would be 967,000 between 2037 and 2046. Some of the information on the rate study baseline. So we're looking at, and Kevin will go through some of what those increases and stuff are with each one, but some as low as 3% in some of the years, as high as 9%. You're in the highest of the years. We are looking at general fund subsidies based off of the modeling would stop by fiscal year 2028. And in 2029, be able to actually start making some repayments to the general fund for the subsidy amounts. The cash loan for Desert Hills, because council has said that you do not want to do subsidies to Desert Hills, but they have been in a deficit cash balance. So the cash loan would be eliminated by 2032. And revenue, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that is understood. So in the rate modeling, what we're doing is we're looking at how much revenue is needed, what percentage increase in revenue. And after the policy decisions, then Kevin's going to take that information and turn it into, okay, what does that mean for a base fee, for meter size that's 1 inch, for 1.5 inch meter size? What is that base fee? What are all the volumetric rates? So right now we have the lowest tier on the volumetric for the water is 0 to 10,000 gallons. One of the things that we want to look at is adding what is referred to as a lifeline tier, where it's a lower threshold, 0 to, I don't know where we'll end up, 3,000, 5,000, whatever, that can be a much lower rate for those who are not using much water and tend to be those who are of lower income. We may also want to add at the top end as well. The top end is usage of over 50,000 gallons of water per month, which is really significant, but I know that there are accounts out there that use far more than even that. So we may want to have a higher tier to try and encourage people to use less water, or if they're not willing to use less water, then contribute more to helping be able to pay for the system and water resources that we'll need. So one of the things that I did mention during the review of the annual comprehensive financial report, the ACFR, when the auditors were here and did their presentation. But this has been a trend over time of where the revenues in the utilities, particularly Cave Creek Water and Desert Hills, were estimated too high. I don't have a lot of answers as to why they were estimated the way they were, because I wasn't here. I don't really have good documentation of how those numbers were determined. I feel like it was just an overestimation in how it was done. In Cave Creek Waters instance, I think some of it was some assumptions of continuing with carefree accounts longer than what we did. There are still a few carefree accounts that are on our system that need to be transitioned, but it's far fewer than what it was initially. So here you see on the top table, I'm comparing what the actual revenues were each of the years for fiscal year 22 through 24 compared to how much had been estimated during the budget process. And each one of those years, the estimates were too high. The worst of those in 2022 was almost 800,000 estimated too high. The estimation that I've come up with for fiscal year 25 is almost 500,000 less than what was budgeted for revenue. When I'm doing my estimate, I'm looking at what are year-to-date numbers that have occurred already, and then looking at historical, and I even built in some seasonality trends because summertime there tends to be more water usage, and I was looking at all the historical trends and translating that into my estimation. And so you can see my estimation kind of falls in line with same as prior years of those numbers were too high. And so I think I'm, close. It's probably not exact, but over those 4 years, that's basically 2.2 million that has been overestimated in those funds.
So say it again. So you think did you, the budget too high? Is that the key number on that page at 493,860?
Yes. So
And-
what was budgeted for fiscal year 25 is too high.
And so this year we're going to budget too high. That means we're going to be short again?
Yes,
For
for fiscal
25?
year 25.
Is this going to be addressed in the rate study?
Yes. And this is one of the things of why we wanted the rate study, is to be able to address things like this.
And you're sure that this is a budget estimation issue and not the fact that we've got a problem with our accounts receivable or
We have
other
not-
things? I mean, there could be embezzlement. I mean, you name it. There's a whole world of things that could possibly be, and you're sure that this is an estimation issue and not one of the others.
I believe so, but I can't guarantee any of that as far as what it is. I can tell you that we have not had significant write-offs, so it's not write-offs of receivables. It's not that. I have seen no evidence of any embezzlement.
Should we get an audit of that to come up with a definitive opinion?
We can do that. I don't think that's what it is, but we can do that.
Do you have the spreadsheets that estimated the revenue?
Yes.
Have those been audited as far as, do we have the correct rates in? Do we have the correct customer classifications in? All that. So, I mean, what number that it's going to be the gallons, it's going to be the rates, and you multiply it out. So is it the gallons or is it the rates to start with, I guess? We,
As-
we would have to underestimate, if the rates are correct, we'd have to underestimate the amount of gallons sold.
I don't believe that when they did the estimations previously, that they were looking at it from that type of perspective.
What? What were they looking at?
I don't know. I don't have any information.
Oh, I thought you had a spreadsheet that had,
No, I was telling you that I did calculations.
Oh, you
I have
did.
my spreadsheet.
so we do not have the work product to produce these budget estimates.
I have not found that.
Could this be accounted for in some of the water that we throw away?
It could possibly be some of that, but the information that gets provided to Wildan when they're preparing the rate study is based off of what's in our utility billing system.
Yeah,
So
I'm not
if
pick-
there's
I'm not-
water.
I'm not picking on you. I'm glad you found the
I'm just
problem,
trying to
but
explain.
to me, I'm looking at this going 2.2 million over 4 years. And that's more than $500,000 a year on average. You know, Houston, we have a problem.
So,
That's why it's being addressed.
yes.
So where is the money coming from to pay for this? Are we taking out of the general fund to subsidize?
So yes, so there's subsidies projected and there have been subsidies. And I have the subsidies in here, but we talked about that when we.
Is
went
this
over
above
the-
and beyond the subsidies that we've talked about? Or is this part
So,
of the
okay,
subsidy?
so the other part, so I wasn't done explaining on all of this, but
Okay.
the other part of this is, when the budget information is put together, you're also putting together a budget on how much do you think you're going to spend. You never spend all of what the budget is. There's always going to be some room built in there. And so not only are revenues less than what was estimated, but the expenditures were also less than what was estimated too.
I understand that. I mean, I understand how that goes. And it's how the DOD sets up the Q account. I get it. How are we going to fix it?
That's what this is all about. So on Desert Hills, similar information here and over the four years, essentially there was, estimated 2.7 million too high for Desert Hills. Wastewater was actually pretty much online. Have a little bit up, a little bit down here and there. Over the 4 years, difference of $7,600. There are a lot of flat fees within wastewater.
There's also a significantly lower customer base.
That too.
So how are we going to estimate it this year? Are we going to are we going to have a spreadsheet that, I mean, I think at the very least, there needs to be an audit trail on what those estimates are, given the situation where we have the gallons we're projecting to sell and the price we're going to sell it at and what that accounts receivable is going to be for that.
Mhm.
So we have just the fact that we have no process to estimate that we have in the past. It would seem like that'd be one of the things we do as a corrective action, is to create a documented process where we can go back and see what's happening at the very least.
Yes. So here's a summary of the general fund subsidies. And so as of 2020, council did a forgiveness of those amounts. So everything prior to June 30, 2020 is wiped off the books. In the last audit report, the ACFR as of June 30, 2024, the wastewater subsidy from general fund was 1.6 million and 137,000 from Cave Creek Water. Based off of my estimations for June 30, 2025, wastewater subsidy grows to a total of 3.2 million. And for Cave Creek Water grows to a total of 3.1 million. Then as of June 30, 2026, wastewater subsidy grows to a total of 4.8 million. Cave Creek Water subsidy grows to a total of 3.9 million. Then as of June 30, 2027, wastewater subsidy no longer increases, and the subsidy for Cave Creek Water increases to 4.4 million.
What's behind the subsidy increases?
Trying to keep the funds balanced with the building up of the rates without some big, huge spike in what the rate increases are and the amount of CIP projects
what-
that we have. And
But that, the CIP, is it CIP driven? Is that what's behind these
That-
growing?
yeah, that's some of it, but it's also just the structural imbalance that's in the funds right now as well.
What does that mean? I'm not sure I understand what that means. Is what structural in there would drive doubling of the wastewater subsidy, for example?
So, with the transfers and everything that are being done and the expenses and everything in there. So that was what we came up with, is that's what it takes to balance that out.
We're gonna need detail on that. I'm gonna stop right here and say, you didn't create this problem. So, but you're here on the hot seat and all these, things are coming out. So please don't feel like this is, any, real or implied criticism, which I think identifying it is the first step towards solving the problem. And I think we're all here in a problem-solving mode. But when we get numbers like this, we're gonna have to have more detail on what specific thing is driving it, right down to specific projects, because we're gonna have to cut that. It's not sustainable, having a 3.2 million. It should be
Yes,
decreasing.
But what I'm showing here is that that's the one-time increase. Then when you look the increase between the 3.1 to the 3.9, fiscal year 26, that's only a subsidy of about 750,000. And then from 26 to 27, that's a subsidy of about 500,000, and then subsidies end. We've got it all balanced out where there's no more
These are
subsidy.
cumulative.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was per year.
No.
Okay.
No, that's why I was saying a total
Hmm.
of subsidies as of those
Okay,
dates.
okay, that's
Yes.
an important point.
Yeah.
It's led me down the wrong path.
Yes.
Okay, I'll calm down.
Okay. For Desert Hill, so as I mentioned, we're not doing subsidies, but it does have deficit cash balance. So as of June 30, 24, in the audit report, they had a deficit cash balance of 368,000. So it starts from there. And then cumulatively, so the total deficit cash balance as of June 30, 25, I'm estimating at 1.4 million, goes to 1.5 in 2026, starts decreasing as rates continue to increase in the model that we have, that we'll be showing you that information. So it starts decreasing 2027, then the cash deficit is down to a total of 1.4 million, 1.3 in 2028, just under 1.3 in 2029, 1.1 million in 2030, 900,000 in 2031, and then down to 0 in 2032. So essentially no more cash deficit
Is
loans.
that a huge
to Desert-
increase that we're talking about in 2031? I mean, that's 900, going from $100,000 to $200,000 a year deduction down to 900,000 in 1 year. What increased?
The rates. So
So they're
it's
gonna have
the
a really big
rates-
increase in 2031, 2032.
The rates, and some of it's going to be like the payoff of some of the existing debt and things like that as well. So we have existing debt that we're still paying on, plus then the new debt that I was talking about earlier.
So this is based on the rates that you've put in the model now.
Yes,
And you've not said, okay, well, we instead of a X% rate, we have to go X plus something to get this trend stopped.
no, we'll be going over all the rates
Okay,
here in just,
I'm just trying to get
Yeah.
bearings on all this stuff. Okay.
yes. But I want to make sure you understand like all of these things of like what it took to get to where we're at on the rates. Okay. So, that was my last, yes. So we want to switch over, to the other PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, to Kevin. And Kevin's going to go through, his slides on the rate model.
Just one more quick question. For the CIP, did this include borrowing? Is borrowing built into this to
Yes.
cover?
Yes, so all that new debt that I talked about on that,
All or?
that new
okay.
slide that I had in there, yes, so it was basically all the CIP projects except for all the various studies and assessments and things that are not capital.
Okay. So I've got a handful of slides here looking at more of the utility side of things, as Sherry said. So what we have up now is the Cave Creek Water. So this is based on the revised budget estimates after Sherry did her work on the revenues and expenditures, and what it's going to take based on what we know today for the next 10 years. So as Sherry mentioned, Sean had a very aggressive capital improvement program. He went back and he's tried to smooth it out as much as he could. Even with that smoothing, it still is very much a front end loaded capital improvement program, which is why we've got the more significant rate increases at the front end here. So we've got, at this point, we're looking at 3 consecutive 8% increases, followed by 6% increases the rest of the years. One thing to note on this is that, as has been in the case with the past, we're anticipating that these rate increases would not go into effect until January 1. So it would be 6 months of a rate increase every year. So to the extent that we wanted to lower those rate increases, one of the things we could do is have it effective July 1, in which case you get more bang for your buck. The rate increases in effect for the full year as opposed to 6 months of the year. But at the same time, if you put it into effect July 1, you're also hitting prime irrigation season. People are using more water at that point in time. They're going to be hit harder on their monthly bill right from the get-go. So that's a consideration we have there. Sherry talked about the debt issuances. So you need a legal requirement of 1.2 times. 1.5 times means you don't have a debt service reserve that you have to fund. These increases here only get us to the 1.2 times coverage. We do not hit the 1.5. So we do have a debt service reserve incorporated into the Cave Creek financial plan. With that being said, these increases do hit the 1.2 times coverage. It maintains a positive fund balance. You've got some cash reserves for emergencies, and the debt service reserve fund is funded every year under this plan. And then you can see the current bill right now for an average single family home at $94.91. 10 years out, if we stuck with this plan, that would increase to $169.60 for the average single family home on the Cave Creek system.
Did you include inflation in your estimates
For
for your inflation in the expenses and?
absolutely, yes. Yeah.
What rate was that, Israel?
It varied between 2% for some costs and up to 4% for other costs. The CIP we've got at 3.5% inflationary going forward. And then we've got some of the more miscellaneous chemicals are going up higher. Fuel costs are higher than the 4%. So it was mostly 4% with some higher for specifics like chemicals and fuel. Looking at the Desert Hills system, so we've got the 9%, 8% followed by some 6s. 2032 is where the general fund subsidy falls off. It's only a 3% increase there, so it's not the big spike that we were talking about a minute ago. That's more reflective of old debt being paid off, as well as the capital improvement program, where it's not smooth every year. The capital improvement program fluctuates up and down every year. So by the time we get to 2030, 2031, the capital improvement program has tailed off a fair bit. So we don't need as much revenue coming in as we did previously to cover the capital improvement program. So under this plan, we do hit the 1.5 times debt service coverage. So we don't have a debt service reserve set aside for the Desert Hills water system. But as Sherry said, the fund balance does not stand on its own until 2032 without some assistance in general fund loans. In this case, we've got the monthly bill right now at $132.94, going up to $215.89. So that was kind of the minimum increase that we had to wean off of the general fund loans, to the extent we wanted to do that sooner. If we raise these rates, again, if we switch to a July 1 implementation as opposed to January 1, that would change the perspective on there too. But that's what we're looking at in terms of Desert Hills right now. On the Cave Creek wastewater, we've got 6% increases from 25-26 through 2033-34. Again, on the Cave Creek wastewater side, we do hit the 1.5 debt service coverage, so we don't have a debt service reserve that we're funding. The fund balance is positive throughout the 10-year period. One of the other things, the metrics that we've looked at on the wastewater side, going back to the original study, Sherry mentioned the half-cent sales tax that goes into the wastewater fund. So that's currently covering some of the O&M costs on the Cave Creek wastewater side. So by the time we get to 2031-32, with these programmed rate increases, rate revenue will be sufficient to fund operations and maintenance expense of the wastewater system, and you wouldn't need to rely on the half-cent sales tax to cover your O&M for wastewater anymore. We've got the average monthly bill right now.
What year is that, Kevin?
That would be in 2031-32.
That's an important point in time.
Yes.
That's because that gives you another $2 million that you can put in your general fund.
Correct.
Does
But-
this
but this-
incorporate expansion of the customer base for the wastewater?
It does.
Has anyone done the calculation to see whether the expansion, what is the payout, the return on investment of the expansion investment? Has anybody done that one?
I-
Let's put that on our to-do list. I mean, we've got to know whether those are cash flow positive or cash flow negative and over what period of time, and whether that's a good investment or not. If that is an investment, we get a $2 million bonus if we spend the money. That's a pretty easy calculation. A simple payout is fine.
I do want to point out, so what Kevin was saying, that the rate revenue would cover the O&M costs. He's not saying it would cover debt service
Right.
costs or CIP costs.
Oh,
It takes that long just to get to that
It's
point.
O&M, sorry. I should have been more clear.
So
Um,
when do we get to the debt service and CIP cost coverage for wastewater?
Beyond the years that were in the model.
So with that, we would go from the $89.77 today to $151.66. So I'll pause for a moment here because the next slides are going to be something slightly different. So I want to make sure we address any
So-
questions on this before we
So
transition.
let me ask a question. For the
Yep.
people that have both water and sewer, you're looking at 209 plus 151
Correct.
per month?
Yes.
All right.
well, what's missing here in my brain is that there must be a terrible increase in expenses somewhere to be getting this bad like this. It's got to be expense and CIP related. We're spending too much money. We're spending too much money. That is I don't see those numbers here, but that's my conclusion. I don't know what else it could be. Is there, could it be
Well,
something
that
else?
was part of our concern of the 2023 integrated master plan has a lot of projects in it, a lot of things that are in there that was well beyond the scope of what the last rate study had considered. So that's why we felt like this needed to be redone to really see what it would take to be able to do that.
We can't spend more money than we have coming in, and these rates are beyond painful.
And I will caveat what I just responded to you, Councilmember Rhodes. So that assumes that we keep the existing rate structure as it is and just increase it by these percentages. As Sherry mentioned, we are discussing looking at a lifeline rate or potentially an additional rate on the top end with higher water use there. So to the extent that we change the rate structure, these bills may not hold as they are today. The assumption right now is that the rate structure stays the same and all rates go up by 6%.
Yeah, I'm just looking at $400 a
Yeah.
month for the average
Sure.
monthly bill.
Right.
Ouch.
Mayor.
So part of that, several slides ago, I had on there, part of what's in here is estimated costs for water resources. So participating in the Bartlett Dam construction, the water rights, Colorado River water rights and some of the other potential water resources that are being explored. Those are all built in here. So it depends upon what decisions are made on that side as well. Because if you're taking some of those numbers out, that's a fairly big difference.
So if we can conserve, that'd be one knob is how much water can we reasonably conserve to not have to buy so much? Because these are water rights we're talking. This is not, water's going to go up in Arizona. I mean, it is going to skyrocket. And all we're talking about is the right to buy water, not the actual cost of the water or the maintenance or things like that. So did you estimate that in here?
The cost of water,
So we've got, within the model, so we've got the cost of the water rights themselves and then the infrastructure to get the water to the town and the treatment and all that's been incorporated into it.
And what is, is the volume of water going higher during this period? Or is it, what is the volume of water doing during this period? You have to assume some kind of Colorado River cut, and you have to have
Right.
assume that we're going to replace it with something,
Correct.
with Colorado River or
Right.
wells or something.
right, which that's built in here. So the Bartlett Dam, the Colorado River, the other potential water sources. There is the well rehab project that Sean has talked about for groundwater. So there's that in there as well.
But is the volume of
Yeah.
water, the total volume that we sell, is it going up or down over this period or staying the same?
We've got it going up by the percentage growth in the system. So we're assuming that each customer is going to be using the same amount of water going forward.
I don't. So are the customers increasing then? I mean, how,
Yeah, so if your customer base grows by 1%, we're assuming you'll have 1% more water sales next year. That every customer is using the same amount of water today as they will be next year and the year after that. But if there's more customers on the system, then the additional water use will be reflective of how many more customers we have on the system as opposed to an exponential or a change in the use per customer.
and since the CIP is not a marginal cost, that is going to stay the same. And so new customers actually help you if you leave the CIP the same.
Do we have comparison data to rate increases over the last 10 years? Do you have that detail?
I don't know. Have you been working on this long enough to have an idea of what those were?
They were as high as 19%.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, we had the first year was 19%.
Desert Hills was higher.
Over a
the last-
10-year period?
Yeah, but we, at
Rates
that
are
point, we were probably 50, 60, average bill was probably
Right.
50 or 60. And there's a 19%, and then we've added some other ones along, but inflation just by itself says you're going to increase your cost by inflation,
Mhm.
no matter what you do, so.
I would like to ask before you move on. So in order to like move forward in a policy direction of what council would like to do, so we want to have some sort of thought of like what you think about what you've seen, because you're seeing continual rate increases year after year after year for multiple years. You're seeing significant debt. You're seeing continuing with some general fund subsidies. And I know we haven't looked at the general fund long range forecast yet, so you haven't seen that part of it. And yes, being able to get to a point of some repayment, because that was one of the things that we were asked to see about putting that in. So I don't know if I know what your thoughts are of like, do you
Counsel?
like what you see? Do you not
Yeah,
like what you
could-
see?
Could we have somebody take a look at a couple of other towns in the area? Not even comparable size, just a couple other towns in the area, and find out what they pay per capita for CIP, what they pay per capita for water and for sewer. The reason that's important is because it gives you a baseline. I mean, I laugh every time I have a contractor come up to my house because I get to pay the Cave Creek discount an extra 25 to 30% just because we're out in the middle of nowhere. So I'm wondering if we have the same issue related to the things we're paying for regarding the town. And I'd like somebody to take a look at that.
I think the
Okay.
Kyle Center just sent that out. I've got that on my desk at home.
Oh.
I think I have a book that has every town in Arizona. It's done with from the standpoint, is water affordable
Mhm.
for people at the lower? I'll give that to you, Sherry.
Okay, thank you. And you said regardless of size, and I would say that not necessarily the size of the population of the community, but the size of the customer base.
Correct.
You do get economies of scale when there are more customers, and we don't have a large system, large numbers of customers like some of the places do. So we don't.
It might be
get-
time to look at different options.
Cynthia, we'll start with you. We'll just go down the row and skip me and go all the way to here.
Okay.
So
Well, the reason I asked the question about comparable data from the past 10 years is to get a perspective. I did not anticipate seeing year after year rate increases at this level. So I would say a high level of discomfort with the numbers I see here and making the water resources affordable on that ongoing basis. So I would say we have more work to do.
Tom?
I think we have to be sustainable. We're facing some uncertainties and they are very difficult. So we may have a sales pitch to do to the citizens, but that's my thought.
I guess sales pitch is one way to say it, but public education is imperative.
Yeah.
Because we know how much water is going to cost. We're getting the information about millions of dollars to acquire other water resources. And our community needs to know that now. And that's why we see the numbers on this screen. And I know that it's shocking, 6% a year, but when you look at the total amount, it's about $5, which is not that bad per year. And to answer Cynthia's question, we, as a council, even prior to my arrival in 2018, did not take responsibility for increasing the costs of water. We ignored how much water was costing, and we did not pass that cost on to our customers. And that was our mistake, because now it's up to this council to enact pretty significant rate increases to catch up. We've tried it in the last few years. We've made some increases, but we were irresponsible in not doing it from the get-go. And so now we need to educate the public in our community for the reasons that we are not a big community, that we're paying more because there's only 5,000 of us, and because we're bringing water from 12 miles away in an old pipeline that requires constant maintenance. So there are justifiable reasons for these increases. I mean, I'm not saying that we can't cut out things from our budget, but we're unique. We're not like Fountain Hills. We're not like Phoenix. We're not like any of the other towns. We are unique and we're paying for it. But that's why people want to live here, because we're rural and we have property and there aren't that many of us. And so we have to pay the cost for that. And that's the reality.
What they said about the education of people and also about the fact that we're probably going to have to catch up is very true. I was speaking to somebody who's in the room actually this morning about this whole thing. And I was informed that there was an 11-year period of no rate increases at one time. And when I moved here, I was paying about $30 for my water bill. I'm paying like 90 now, 25 years later or whatever it is. But it went up all of a sudden, like pretty astronomically at one point. So we got some catching up to do.
When we purchased the water company, we knew that maintenance was not being done the way it needed to be done. We had a water company that had very poor infrastructure. So I think in that sense, we knew what we were getting into, but we're paying the price.
Mhm.
And I think rates were kept at a relatively low level because maintenance was not being done.
My thoughts are, we have, I mean, we're gonna, I would rather sell less water at the same cost. It would be my initial thing to, try to get, I think we're gonna have to have a run that, well, first of all, we're gonna have to look at those expenses, especially CIP. CIP has got to be gone through with a hatchet. If we can't afford to do it, then we're gonna have to go down to what's necessary for safety, environmental quality, and to keep the system reliable, and nothing to do with improvements. I mean, as far as lowering costs or make it easier or less repair, we may not be able to do that. I think we're going to, no matter what we do, we're gonna be paying more just with inflation. I mean, you can count on a 3% increase every year doing nothing without any increases. We're gonna have to look at that CIP, the one-time cost. If there are things on there like the wastewater expansion, we're gonna have to look at what the payout is and either do it more gradually in smaller bites or wait until 2029 or 2030 or something like that before we start that project. I don't think we can, I really do not, I don't think with the, we haven't seen the general fund part, but the general fund has its own rate increases, its own for fire mainly, that we got to take into account, and we have falling construction taxes. We don't have that much land or building going on right now, and we can't count on that to bail us out. So there's $1 million in construction sales tax alone. So the ability of the general fund to do this is limited. So I think we've got to go back to the drawing board, and I think it's going to be up to staff to do that hatchet job. You've got to come down. We have to find a case study that is affordable. Increases, yeah, we can get it, but the subsidies going up and up and up. I think it ought to be a no increase in subsidy case. We're not going to increase, no increase in general fund subsidy. Now, maybe the general fund in this is so good that the general fund can afford it. I don't know. We don't know that answer, but I suspect it can't.
So the general fund subsidy where for Cave Creek Water, that was like 3.1 million as of the end of this fiscal year. Like this fiscal year is almost done. We, the only CIP project that was debt financed was the Phoenix Interconnect project. You had all those other CIP projects that are in there that have not been debt financed. And that's a big part of why that is going up so much. The next year, fiscal year 26, we're only saying another 750,000 and then $500,000 the following year for Cave Creek Water. So it really isn't that much.
It's not as bad as I thought, is it?
Right.
Seemed, yeah.
So the big one is really the year we're currently in, that if this analysis had been done a year prior, you probably would have said, let's debt finance some of the projects that are in this year or push some of the projects further out that are in this year. I don't know. But wastewater is the one where it's still going to be somewhat substantial. And as we know, wastewater is one that's going to be difficult to balance.
What are utility expenses doing during this period? Is that the 2 to 3.5% that you're talking about? So we took this year's budget and
Right. We took this year's budget and we escalated it by and large by 4% a year, with the exception of like chemicals and fuels and that kind of stuff. We increased by more than 4%.
well, we probably need some work on those expenses too. Because we should be getting to the end of the time when we're spending money as catch up. Been doing that for 10 years. Some point, those expenses ought to start trending lower, and we need to perhaps project that.
Could we see the slide just on Cave Creek Water?
For the rate increases?
Yeah. Yeah. Lot.
But in addition to it, on top of that, you've got the increasing in the amount of money that the general fund has put in the water company. So in order to break even, you'd have higher rates than this, correct?
So this this is part of why we're able to bring the subsidy for next year down to only 750,000, 500,000 the next year. And then by 2029, starting to do some repayment to the general fund, and Cave Creek Water would be done repaying the general fund by 2034. Or actually, was it 2033 or 2034? I can't remember.
2034.
2034.
So at that point, there's no money being subsidized for the water or sewer?
Just the Cape Creek Water Fund.
Yeah, no money being subsidized and repaid the subsidies back. No more forgiveness, repay
So-
them.
The water and sewer system pay for themselves, but no.
Right now, we're just talking Cave Creek Water.
Cave Creek Water pays for itself?
Correct.
Okay, when does the sewer company pay for itself? Beyond 2033?
So incorporated in wastewater is starting to repay in 2029, but it's beyond these years of when it would.
It's beyond
fully
2033,
repay.
right?
So technically, if it wasn't repaying the general fund, then it would be taking care of itself,
In what year?
2029.
So at that point, 2029, wastewater pays for itself and they start repaying in 2030?
Right now, we have programmed and they start repaying in 2029.
Okay.
But
And what about
But the
desert?
reason why you still need those rate increases, and it's helping to cover that repayment back to the general fund.
I mean, we're looking at a 50% increase in 10 years, right? Roughly?
Does this take into account that we may have less water to sell because of cutbacks from the settlement of the Colorado River?
Correct. So the reduction of our water delivery, there could be less water, but again, I'll just reminder. So in this Cave Creek Water, we're including Bartlett Dam, the Colorado River rights that we would attempt to acquire, and the other potential sources that we're pursuing right now to be explored. So that's built into these rates. Yes, we're assuming that those costs would be debt financed, and so you're paying for the debt service for those, which would go on for we assume 20-year terms. But that's built into the rates that those water rights, those projects would be included.
When would we assume that additional water would come in?
Council, we're pursuing multiple things from the master plan. We're looking at short-term immediate needs and then getting into midterm and long-term solutions. So that's what we built into the capital program that got put into the rate study. So what we're trying to do is actually we expect in 2027, come January 2027, we're in a situation where we're in a water shortage situation. We think we can bridge the first few years by doing some recharging. But we're getting into these larger capital projects like the Bartlett Dam project. If council's not aware, the Bartlett Dam estimate has now tripled in cost. So the last estimate that we saw was over $3 billion on the project. When we actually signed on for that letter of commitment just a few months ago, it was actually just over $1 billion. And that project currently doesn't have a scheduled completion date before 2034. So that's water resource. That's a long-term solution. We're also looking at buying, and the council might recall a couple of weeks ago, we came in front of you with a non-disclosure agreement to start discussions with the Harquahala Valley Water Users Association to get groundwater rights. That's something we think if we were able to successfully get completed in 3 to 5 years, probably more like 3-year timeframe, we might be able to get some water resources out of that to bring back to help bridge the gap that we have currently that we're foreshadowing in our water resources.
So
we have
I
several.
wouldn't count on that one because the water is very alkali and you're going to have to desalinate. And there's no desalinization plant and the cap will not allow you to put it in unless it's desalinated.
Yeah, in that case, water quality is something we need to look at with the Harquahala Valley. That's why we need to start those discussions. There are actually other agencies that are looking to do the treatment. So we do we'd purchase the water resources and probably have to contract with someone to actually treat that groundwater to make it suitable to be put into the Cap Canal. So there's additional costs for all
Yeah,
these.
they haven't
projects.
done the subsidence studies either to see if the ground will collapse underneath them as they pump large volumes. That's a 3 to 5 year effort all by itself.
There's lots of, yeah, we don't have any firm solutions, but we have and we're in a few weeks, we're actually doing a presentation to explain all the different things that we're looking at for the town. It's a serious situation, you know, at this point, we don't even know how far the cuts and how deep the cuts will be in 2027. So we have a moving target. And we've heard, you know, in the master plan, we had a 25 and a 35% scenario. We've heard it could go even deeper than that, but we don't know. So we don't even
The
know.
cuts are additive. So if you think the 100% pool 2 years ago, the numbers they're talking about, we've already taken 20%. So there's 80% of the 100%. There's got whatever the number they're talking, 25, 35, 40, that's off that 100. So you're talking an additive of somewhere with, you know, in excess of 50%.
50% cut, explain that, Dusty. 50% cut of what? From our current water allocation?
No, the water allocation we had in 2022, they're looking at
2206. We have 2206 is our allocation from CAP.
correct.
And so you're saying it's 50?
Yes.
How do you arrive at?
20% came last time with the NIA and the other cuts they made. That was the
Oh,
2024
well,
cuts.
we have information from CAP and I think from DWR that the, it's just conversation. I mean, this hasn't been decided yet. No one
Right.
knows or can know. But the whisper number is a 25% from the people who are inside.
Yeah,
Is that
plus
not-
the 20% is a 45% from the original baseline number. Remember that been talking to the state legislature. They said flat out, they're not touching the Indian water and they're not going to touch any agricultural water, period. So all the cuts are going to come out of M&I. The problem that you have is the industrial. Governor Ducey signed a long-term agreement with the chip plants. That water is not touchable. They have priority over everything else. So other than the Indian water. So it really is going to be like a 50% cut.
Well, why
So-
don't you guys get together offline and see if we come and make sure we come to some kind of
So what we
read.
built into the rates is actually pretty aggressive. The next 4 to 5 years is where we've got potentially the Bartlett Dam project, which we still kept in even with the higher cost, and then for projections and buying groundwater rights through Harquahala and or Colorado River water. So totaling those, we have about $12 million we're trying to finance right now. So, but we don't know which solution is going to work for us. So we had to hedge our bets by trying to put something in and have the availability for funding. So if some of those drop out, we might be able to smooth out these rates even further, but I can't predict anything right now. We don't know what our cut is, what we're aiming for. So it is a challenge.
So Mayor, Council, if I may, Sean referenced that at the end of the month, we're going to be having a water strategy meeting, and it's going to be very comprehensive. It's going to be addressing our short-term, midterm, and long-term water needs. We're also going to have some of our outside water experts there at the meeting as well. And we'll kind of go over some of the things that we've done in a public setting so far related to our water resources. So, and then we can talk some of these things that we've talked about today. Certainly, we would be able to research some of those a little bit further. We're also going to be, in 2 weeks, we'll be having our budget workshops. And we had intended all along to have 1 day dedicated primarily to the utilities related to that and their capital. So that's going to be an opportunity to get into some of the detail as to the projects that are put into the multi-year capital budget. So,
I have a question, Grady.
sure.
Would it be a good idea to at least have on hand via Zoom some water subject matter experts for our water workshop? So we're not relying on what people hear in different circles, because we've heard directly from the CAP staff, we've heard directly from the director of DWR, we've heard directly from the governor's office.
Sure.
So I think it would be a really good idea to have experts in the room with us telling us what they're anticipating.
So that is something we can work on. It's actually a good idea. because those folks have given us some good guidance and direction. So we were going to take that information and share that, but I think having them there would be good if there's any questions of that.
If they're available, that would be
Right.
wonderful.
So Sean, would you maybe work with?
Yeah, reach
Uh,
Um, Sean, before you leave,
Yeah. Nice. try.
if you lowered the criteria for CIP, water and sewer CIP to that necessary for safety, reliability, water quality. And by reliability, I mean system reliability, not every different house. We may have to focus extra maintenance work to take care of that. It seems like that is going to be, maybe Sherry disagrees with me, but it seems like that would be a legitimate base to start with, because that's the lowest we can get away with as far as capital requirements.
So in fact, I've done that 3 times since November. And Kevin's going to kick me because I've given him 3 different scenarios to run. He's saying, what are you doing? So yeah, we
Kevin's
have
worked
gone
with us
through it.
before.
The master plan was a good document because it pointed out a lot of things which didn't meet standards. Then we have to look at the lens of what's fundable. And then again, is it critical for the system? The system still has a lot of deficiencies. There's a lot of areas of the system where we still have a 4-inch and 2-inch water lines that we actually need to replace. We have booster stations which need to be upgraded, and there's a lot of deficiencies we know about. It's a double-edged sword. If we can't afford it, we can't afford it, and we'll have to prioritize a little bit better. But I've actually already gone through it 3 times with that lens. But if someone else, we can look at it again. If we have to cut, we will have to cut. But we're also facing some challenges right now. We actually have a meeting set up in 2 weeks. Central Arizona Project is telling us about what they're going to want us to do to the CAP 1 booster pump station. I've got that meeting scheduled. So we've got some money budgeted, but I don't know what the scope is. And we're actually also having a discussion on the water treatment plant. We actually have the operational permit with Maricopa County to run the Paul filters. Well, we've had a conversation with them and they've changed. They're looking at that permit. We wanted an extension to give us 5 to 7 years to fund a membrane expansion project at the plant. They might want to have us do that sooner. That's a $7 million project. So I'm trying to forego that as much as I can, but I'm working with the regulators on that. So we have some challenges before us. So
Well, how much of the CIP is being borrowed? And how much are we trying to fund with operating cash flow?
So for fiscal year 2026 forward in our 5-year plan, everything that can be.
Including these projects you're talking about then? So they're not going to have that big an effect on the,
So the 7 million that he was just talking about, that's not in there yet because that's recent stuff that has
well, that's
occurred.
actually, that's in the rate model 2031 is what I already had that built in. The question is whether they're going to ask us to do it sooner. But I think that the answer is that, yeah, we've gone through 3 iterations and Kevin's run the different models and they're trying to debt fund the CIP as presented.
Yes.
okay, so there's no more, debt funding is no longer an option for the capital projects for the CIP project. Is that what I'm hearing? For any further, we've done all we can.
So cash funding CIP projects, we really can't afford to do that.
So we've already done it. So you're saying the same thing I'm thinking from the different angle.
Finance it.
Yes, we need to finance.
One thing
the
we
projects.
haven't heard is the potential of mandatory conservation. If
Mhm.
our people don't want to spend 8% a year over the next 10 years, then we need to think about options. And maybe it is that we don't buy $12 million worth of additional water resources and rights. That we force ourselves to not use as much, since we're getting cut back potentially between 20 to 50%, according to some folks.
Well, I think the problem though, I'm having the dialogue here. I think
Yeah.
the problem is if you cut the amount we use, you also cut the amount that we get. So
That's-
it's a pernicious thing where that water now becomes twice as expensive because we need X amount of dollars coming in.
But we wouldn't need $12 million if we don't buy additional water sources. So that's always the issue with conservation. Yeah, you're not going to bring in as much revenue, but we won't need as much of the resource. And that's a decision that perhaps our community needs to make.
That's gonna affect home prices and everything else, so it's a lot more complex than just, I mean, that'd be an interesting study for somebody to take a look at. But
And maybe it's not
agree.
all or nothing, but maybe it's
Well,
halfway
maybe-
there.
Maybe we look at divesting the companies and having one of the commercial providers do it.
That's,
I mean, they provide it for about 40 towns here in Arizona. I mean, that might be an option too.
We, yeah, we don't have the time or the, to do that, or even to study it, and that's a very expensive study, just to study what that is, because they're gonna have the same problems we have unless they have water sitting around. I don't think anybody in the state's gonna have water sitting around ready for somebody else.
Well, actually, I've been talking to the commercial water companies. There are 4 of them out there that bought up a whole bunch of the or a bunch of the excess Indian water. That's why you're having a hard time finding it. And their comment was their business model has changed. So they want to see customers. They're not willing to sell those water rights.
Mhm.
So that's fundamentally the difference. We might need to take a look at something like that just to put on the table. May not be a viable option for us, but I don't think we should discount anything at this point. And I think we ought to talk to those commercial water companies.
do you think that water rates would be cheaper with a private water company?
No, but they have the water. That's a difference. We don't right now. We aren't going to have water. The earliest water we're going to get is Bartlett Lake Dam,
10
yeah.
years from now,
10 years from now.
15.
Well, Harquahela Basin is going to probably be longer than that, at least according to the guys that I was talking to, both at the state capitol and then CAWRD.
Well, the head of the Department of Water and Resource, the Department of Water Resources steered us towards Harquahela.
All right.
Um,
So did the legislature. They said you ought to go take a look at it. And then, oh, by the way, the water is saline. We haven't done the subsidence studies, so we don't know how much we can really pump out of the ground without disturbing. So, I mean, there's any water issue we have right now is a long-term solution. So Harquahela is going to be ready for another, 12 to 15 years too, worst case.
Mayor, if I may, we're on a kind of a time crunch with the folks we have here.
Mhm.
This has been a very good discussion though, and I think it's one that should be continued when we have our water strategies meeting, because much what I'm hearing is more longer term
Mhm.
kind of thoughts on what we do. So with that, I'll go ahead and we'll continue.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
so,
I just want, are we trying to get enough information to decide to cut loose with the water rates we need next year? Is that the critical path? Is what we
We
do with
really
rates?
believe that we need to have water rate increases in place come this next January 1 or as close to that as possible, because the reliance currently on general fund subsidies, what you were seeing of the revenues weren't really panning out of what was being estimated and what we're actually getting in. Like, we have an issue that we need to address, and the sooner we address it, the better.
So we have a critical decision in the next, to get water rates decided for this coming budget year, which we're, 8 weeks away from needing to have a budget ready to go.
I don't believe that's what Sherry's saying. I believe what she's saying is we need to understand and get your acceptance that this is a serious matter. We need to initiate a water and wastewater rate study. This is preliminary what's been done.
Oh, okay.
They're going to need some additional policy guidance, which is what they were trying to get today with the reaction to what you see, and also the payback to the general fund for the loans that the general fund's provided. So, and there's going to be some decision factors that will be in the budget process for capital that are all kind of tied back to rates. So they will know after the budget what needs to be programmed in for the rate analysis. Does that make sense?
Except
They're interrelated.
we're not in a position as of the last hour and a half, having seen these numbers, we're not in a position to give you policy guidelines without seeing. So you're going to have to propose the policy guidelines you think the town needs to stay wet and to stay solvent.
No,
Yeah.
but you've given us enough direction with like the rate percentages, what we're hearing, people are not extremely happy about that. And also there's been some direction that they want the general fund to be paid back.
Mhm.
So we're getting a lot of information that needs to be built into a rate base, you know?
Yeah.
And then same thing, what we heard earlier, which is a policy direction, is to go back and sharpen our pencils on the capital. And that's going to be something we're going to go back and do before you see us in 2 weeks for our review of the budget.
And one thing I have a lot of heartburn with is subsidizing anything towards Desert Hills.
Hmm.
There is, I mean, they need to pay the going rate, so to speak, because the town can't use our general fund to subsidize a company that's outside that is a for-profit company. So for one, if you want the number one policy guideline is Desert Hills has got to stay current, and they've got to develop the reserves that we need to have continuous
Okay.
service out there.
Thank you. So Kevin does have a couple more slides. So because of our concerns about water resources, I asked him to give us some kind of just rough estimation and a couple different ways of looking at water resource fees.
Yeah, so at the outset, I'll say the numbers that you see here, these are not over and above what we just looked at in the financial plans. These would be incorporated within those financial plans. So we're not looking at like the 8% increase and then plus this fee on top of that. It's just providing you some context on the water resources. So in working with Sean, we were able to identify the different projects that would replace the reductions that we're expecting in water resources coming on. So the Cave Creek well rehab, the Bartlett Dam, the Phoenix ASR, and then other potential resources that the town's looking at. So those are the costs associated with supplementing the existing water source for existing customers. So these projects take place between 2025 and 2029 in that time frame there. Based on the respective usage of each system, Sean and I have estimated that about 60% of the water would be needed for the Cave Creek system, about 40% of the water would be needed for the Desert Hill system. So if we look at what the total annual cost is, for the Cave Creek side, it would be $3,130,560. So that's what the total cost to fund these additional water resource projects were if we were to pay cash for it. So if we were just cash fund it at the time of the project, that's what it would cost. We have annual Cave Creek water flows of 358,990, which equates to a cost per 1,000 gallons of $8.72 for those new water resources if we were to cash fund them right away. The average single-family home in Cave Creek uses 10,000 gallons a month. So that would mean their water resource component of their bill would be $87.20 just for those new water resources. All that being said, as we've discussed, we're planning on debt funding the projects. That's what the model's incorporating right now. So if we were to debt fund those projects, those same projects, so the total cost to the Cave Creek system would be just over $15 million. So if we divide that by the 20 years that we're spreading the debt over, it would be about $762,000 a year. Again, 358,000 gallons per year. So that would equate to a cost of $2.13. So at an average use of 10,000 gallons a month, $21.25. So within those average single family bills that we were looking at before, $21.25 of that would be the cost associated with these new water resources that we're looking at.
So I have a question regarding that.
Yeah.
You're assuming that's only going to go for 10 years?
We're assuming the debt's going to be for 20 years, so we're funding it over a 20-year period.
But isn't that, excuse me, isn't that an annual cost?
It is an annual cost, yes. So it would be
that
$21.
cost is- But
yeah.
that cost is going to go beyond 10 years.
It
right?
would go beyond 10 years.
So the 20-year financing, is that going to continue to roll over every year?
Correct.
All right.
And then the other side of the house, for lack of a better term, would be the growth side. So this is where we're looking at new Colorado water river rights associated with just providing benefit to new development that's coming in. So for Cave Creek, again, the same 60-40 split. So the cost for the Cave Creek system would be just over $3.6 million, $3.66 million. We're anticipating that would generate 192 acre feet of water, which equates to a cost of $19,063 per acre foot. The average single family home in the Cave Creek area uses 0.37 acre feet of water a year. So that will be a one-time water resource cost of $7,020 for the water resources associated with new development. We did the same thing where if we financed it, then that 3.6 million becomes $5.86 million because of the interest charges over the next 20 years. So in that case, if we were to debt fund those water resource projects, then the water resource fee per single family home would be $11,239. So on the existing side, it's better to debt fund it. On the growth side, we're looking better at cash funding it,
But I would add that on the growth side, you don't necessarily know when those revenues are going to come
Exactly.
in. And so then you would have a cash flow issue.
It's
So it
correct.
could be better to debt finance.
on that side, yeah.
So we have to decide, one of the policy is, do we stop growth?
Correct.
Or do we put in, I guess the state law require you to, as I recall, they will not allow you to charge a water rate to a new customer higher than the existing customers to pay for any marginal water that you have to go out and get. Is that what you recall, Grady? Or-
I don't recall that. But I think that, again, the policy decision is and you hit the nail on the head, is for growth. Now, when we've been talking about for some of these outside water resources, that there's a certain assumption that some of it, like maybe 75% is for existing and maybe 25% is growth. When we're talking growth, we're not talking necessarily about residential growth. It might be something that generates economic activity for the town, TPT and some other type of sources. So I think that's important, particularly for the growth, to pay for growth. And so whether it be a capacity fee or impact fee, but your technical question, I don't have the answer to.
So if we do freeze growth, that will essentially stop any construction fees, correct? So now we have $1 million hit to the general fund.
You're not going to bring in permit fees and you're not going to have construction sales taxes and.
No, I'm just saying could you lay out what the impacts are if we do no growth? I'm not looking for a detailed analysis, just identify what costs.
And there would be some costs or some revenues that would remain if somebody's just doing a remodel of their home or things like that. That would be
Understand
growth.
that, but could we just get a kind of a,
Yeah,
what would go away and what would stay?
And we do have some certificated areas already that are granted water rights. So we'd have to kind of let you know what those numbers are, because you have in the west part of the community, there are some areas that are limited, but they do have some prior rights.
Yeah, and north of town also, there's quite a number of properties that you could put wells on.
It's a good question. We'll go ahead and research that.
That was all I had.
That's enough.
Okay, so now we're going to go back over to the other PowerPoint presentation, Brian. And so Jim Rounds will go through what he has on the long range forecast.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you again.
Welcome back.
I always like to get together with you because you ask a lot of good questions. I just took a few notes. I'm just going to take a minute to go over this from everything I've heard so far. Some of the things that we had a great working relationship with your team, with Pat, Kevin, a lot of brainstorming, but these are really complicated issues. And like Dusty, Councilmember, you brought up, you do one thing, it has another impact as well. And I even remember when we were doing some water infrastructure analysis for City of Phoenix going up north, one of the biggest issues that they ran into is if you build pipes that are too small, you got a problem. If you build them that are too big, you have a problem as well. and they had to implement an extreme program to conserve water. They ended up conserving so much that the collections went down, and then they had to figure out clever ways that were potentially a little bit illegal maybe to help subsidize it. So there's all these extra complicated things. But one way around that is to forecast extremes when you're looking at these things. And so we'll give you some examples of this, but what happens if on water conservation technology changes happen and people just naturally use it even without it being forced? What would that look like? How does that risk what you're doing? And then another one is bring the business cycle into the analysis as much as you can, because what's happening right now, we're in a situation where we're talking about inflation being lower because of the rate. Prices are just as high as when they were growing at 12%. Inflation has not gone negative. That means that prices are just as high as before. So just because the rate of growth has gone down, we're still seeing escalated costs. That has to be part of it. Now that's going to increase going forward for a little while, a lot because of the tariff issues. There's going to be a lot of cutbacks in government spending following a period where we added 10 trillion to the national debt. You have a lot of things flipping in terms of what happens in DC. It's going to impact what's happening here. Now, what that also means is that it creates extra uncertainty. If your forecast is less certain because there's too many moving parts and you're not comfortable with it, how do you become more comfortable? You got to lower the forecast. And so when things are uncertain, you got to be a little bit more conservative with the forecast. Doesn't mean you have to take everything to zero, but it's worthwhile to run scenarios where maybe collections in a category would normally be 5 or 6%. What would it be in order to break the system? Or what would happen if it was 2%? What do the extremes mean? And that helps us a lot when we do forecasting with different groups, is sometimes you don't know the exact number, but you do know that if the extreme was at a certain rate of growth and it really wasn't going to cause any budget problems, we weren't worried about it. If just being off a little bit in a category meant we have a $10 million hole by 2035, then all of a sudden it's something that you got to look at more closely and you have to follow up like what you're talking about. So all the different discussions that were going on, I very much liked. In terms of costs, there's always a discussion about borrowing for capital, whether or not it's more prudent to pay cash. As a policy person, as a conservative policy person, I've always felt like the most fair thing to do for taxpayers is to borrow, because you're putting in a road that has a certain life. Why put all the costs on the people that currently live here that aren't going to be using it in 20 years? You want to spread that cost over time. So it's actually not it's not a left-leaning type of a concept, or we're trying to be unfair to taxpayers. It's actually the more fair way of doing it. And I think last time when we had that kind of brainstorming session, which was kind of fun, we didn't solve any specific problems that led to this, but we were talking about some of these things that could help you in some cases. And then in some cases, you might want to partner with other groups, whether or not it's water conservation programs or other things. You don't have to literally or figuratively carry the water on your own for preservation issues, other things like that. There's a reason why cities and towns work with counties and then the state government on certain projects. And unfortunately, the state government hasn't had the most innovative ideas related to economic development recently. So it's incumbent upon others, the communities, economists, others, to come up with some of these things. So sorry for that little break, but just some suggestions for how to go about this going forward. And Luis Cordova, he and I stayed up most of the night working on this. I needed to rest my eyes, and so I went and I washed my car at 11:30 at night in the driveway. And there's a person walking his Yorkie, and he looked at me and he said, "Why are you washing your car at 11:30 at night?" And I said, "Well, why are you walking your dog at 11:30 at night?" I think I was the weird one though. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is a lot went into this. There were a lot of different pieces, and I want to show you some scenarios. And Luis, even as recently as 20 minutes ago, provided a couple of additional scenarios for you. Okay, are we in the right one? Okay, the formatting changed. So we started basically with a baseline scenario, which is the most likely. You want to start there. Normally, we would do an optimistic scenario and a pessimistic scenario. In this case, we did a pessimistic scenario, and then what happens if things really fall off a cliff? And that's just because we don't know what kind of direction we're going to be seeing coming from our friends in Washington, which means we could have a recession happening in the next 2 months, or we might not see one for another year. The tariffs are going to have an impact on a lot of costs. If the Medicaid cuts happen, the day that that happens, the state's in recession, so we'll be in a different territory just from that alone. But we started with that, and then with the baseline scenario, we assumed that there would just be a mild recession in fiscal year 26, maybe rolling into 27. Now, we've even had policymakers say, we're putting in policy that is likely to cause a recession. So this isn't one of those scenarios where, like I joked last time, that economists have predicted 10 of the last 0 recessions. The economy was slowing. The tariffs will have an impact because we're the ones paying the tariff. So there's going to be a transfer of wealth from the individual to the federal government for a little while until we can negotiate better tariff terms. But that takes a little bit of time. And then we might see a lot of cuts to spending coming into the state. So there will be a mild recession. Not a big deal, but the annual sales tax growth, fiscal year 26, this builds off what you're using for fiscal year 25. And that assumes that there'd be that mild downturn, and then you'd slowly creep back up. Now, if this is the best estimate, this is our best guess, but you can't just rely on that, because you as policymakers have to decide, do I want to take much of a risk in revenues coming in less than what we're spending and then having to deal with the issues that we were talking about earlier? So, we also did another calculation. Under the baseline scenario, this is one of those extreme examples. What can your spending be on an average annual basis for that? Remember how we talked about that bottom right number, whether it was red or black last time, and that was at the end of 35, whether or not you had a positive balance or negative. So over the forecast period, was everything managed properly? So we ran that into the ground where it was just about at 0, with the operating expenditure growth increasing by 4.65%. So under the baseline scenario, you'll have to keep your spending below that amount. One thing that Louise just did a few minutes ago was we plugged in a number that we were discussing with staff, which was, what if we have 3% growth? And that was just kind of a best guess at the time. Well, the 0 balance at the end of 35 went up to $14 million in the black. So what you spend clearly has it greatly influences how this turns out. It's not just about the revenue forecast. It's about how much you spend, and can you keep that expenditure amount as low as possible. There's way too much going on here, but it's in the handout. But the bottom line is that bottom right number, it's basically 0. So if your expenses grow by 4.65%, no more, you're just barely going to be in the black at the end of 35.
Jim, can you pause just here for
Yeah,
just
of
a
course.
moment? So we did print big ones. So if you're having difficulty looking at your screen, so this one that he's showing right now is the page that says that it's the baseline scenario. If looking at the paper copy is easier for you.
Now, the next scenario is the pessimistic scenario, and we have a slightly more severe recession happening. This would be the case if the tariff implications were more severe than people are anticipating, and the cutbacks compared to the excess spending we had from the prior years, and then we really cut spending over the next couple of years, we're going to see a more severe recession. It'll be a little bit longer, and it'll impact the numbers. So we had We had 0% in fiscal year 2007. The model provides very specific numbers, but no one cares if something's 0.99% or 1%, so we round it out. And in this particular case, you need to limit your spending to no more than 4.15% on average over the next decade. So it went down some, but it seems like a manageable difference.
Jim, it seems like no mystery that if your inflation is 2% and you're spending 4%, you're gonna run out of money sooner or later.
Yeah, well, and the challenge on the inflation issue is inflation has been going up by more than tax revenues. So one thing that we warned a lot of our clients over the last 2 or 3 years is because inflation was high, you're collecting tax revenues on that inflated dollar amount.
Yeah.
And then eventually the levels are still there, but you're not getting that growth. So you'll see a little bit of a shock in the short term, and then you'll still see this modest growth until eventually prices are going to have to fall back to the long-term trend at some point. But not all costs get passed along to the consumer. Sometimes the producer has to absorb some of those. But in general, you have seen an increase in tax revenues, but the inflation costs, and this is what's impacting a lot of the discussion that you had earlier, labor costs, capital costs, even some of our great economic development projects like TSMC. There's construction companies around the entire greater Phoenix area that are having a hard time finding labor, materials, and others because we have some really big projects happening. And so sometimes economic growth can exceed the inputs. Usually that happens more on the workforce side, but now we're seeing it on the material side. That'll stabilize some, and that could bring the prices down some, but the local supply demand issue combined with the national and even the global supply and demand issues is what really propped up those additional costs. So pessimistic scenario, 4.15% would be your cap. And in this case, why is that minus 1.6 million now? Okay. All right. So a couple of edits. Again, this is because we were working and washing cars in the middle of the night. That means that the 4.15 probably needs to be around 4.
I do want to say, as we said, these projects are interrelated, and really Jim Rounds here was kind of at the end of the chain of the interrelationship and dependent on, because with staff to get stuff to Wildan and stuff from Columbia Capital and stuff to Jim Rounds, and so he's kind of at the end of the chain, and I really appreciate all the work that he's done to get us here.
But we like you guys, so it's cool.
In the middle of the night.
The car's clean. It looks good, at least. All right. So again, it changed since I had to come down here a little bit early because of something I had to do, and you were gracious enough to let me borrow an office for an hour. So the prior baseline scenario, the ending balance was 13 in fiscal year 35. The current baseline, it's 4.6. So these are just some forecast comparisons compared to what we had last time around. But last time around, if you remember, in that other workshop, there were a lot of things that were, a lot of your costs that were still moving parts at the time. So this is just in case you look at any of the spreadsheets from last time, why it's different. A lot of that, the forecast didn't change that much. It did come down because there are new economic arguments that it should have come down a little bit, but really all the other cost measures were being fine-tuned.
Did you start with our $35 million?
Yes.
So we start with 35 and we go down, we spend all of the reserves over 10 years.
Yes, but that's at the spending level that you're saying of where it breaks us even at the end.
And is that
approximately.
with the increases or without in water rates?
So if it should have all the latest data in here, but again, the extreme was you don't want to go above that spending level or you're going to be more negative down the road. You don't want to put yourself in that position or future lawmakers. But if we plugged in that 3% example, the zero goes to a positive 14.5 million. So overall, for that kind of a time period, it looks pretty good, especially given the uncertainty that we have, the fact that you got to plug in a slightly more conservative forecast because you just don't know. And the budget next year is more important to be precise than the budget the year after that compared to the year after that. The farther out you go, you have more time to make adjustments. But on these long-term expenditure things, the capital expenditures, you got to make decisions now because you're locked in on them. Okay, did a very severe recession, and we ended up with minus $10 million. And again, the reason that we wanted to give these examples is because, one, I wouldn't bet my life that one of these could never happen. You just don't know. But the most likely scenario is still what we call baseline most likely. The next one would be that recession scenario. And I think as you're developing the budget, there's going to be a lot of information, and because we've already talked about a lot of these things, the tariffs, all these other things, on whether or not it's going to have a more severe impact on your budget, because we have to monitor this for the state, for the county, for other communities. And in fact, I'm hoping that it's been, great working with your staff. They're always welcome to reach out and just say, have you changed any of your forecasts? Maybe, we could tell them, yeah, we just reduced the county's forecast by 0.2%, and here's why. It's always good to share information with people. So as you continue to develop this, even if we're done with our portion, feel free to reach out and contact, and, we'll let you know if there maybe is an argument to shift to a more conservative forecast, or maybe be a little bit more careful in a particular category. Oh, last time when we had that meeting, there was interest in what kind of dollar amounts are we talking about from if we lost a store or added a store. There was some discussion like that. And so Luis did some modeling. The grocery store, the estimated annual sales tax revenue is over 500,000, home improvement over 1.5 million. It's always important to know how you're going to grow. There's very negative connotations with a no growth community, but a quality growth community that is embracing business development and trying to increase wealth while increase amenities and the quality of life for people. That sounds a whole lot better on a bumper sticker. You just can't read it because there's too many words. But that's part of that outreach, Kathleen, Vice Mayor, that you were talking about. So if one of these things happens, if there's state land issues that I know are at play, there's all sorts of interesting things happening. But the complexity of the budget discussion so far, it does seem like it's complicated because of these moving parts, but really there's only like 4 or 5 of them. It's not like there's 50 different things that you're having to deal with. And I feel like you're going to be able to get to a point where you're not going to be leaving a huge fiscal problem for, community policymakers 5-10 years from now. I feel like this is a manageable budget, and I've seen far worse scenarios, mainly because a lot of other communities decided, when the federal government spent all that money and we saw the extra tax collections, they said, this is going to go on forever. Let's spend it on permanent items. And now a lot of them are struggling. You all didn't do that. And so you're in decent shape, even though there's concerns about some of these negative numbers going out. I don't see anything in here that isn't manageable. So I think you've been doing a good job. It's just you have to fine tune the car right now. You already built it. And any questions on that?
I guess I'm kind of surprised that seeing that kind of trend doesn't make me sleep at night.
The weak numbers.
Yeah, the fact that you're pulling the numbers down, when you're headed into a iceberg, you try to change direction.
Well, here's what I would ask though. So did you underspend and create the current fiscal problems, which led to the huge surplus earlier?
Well, a lot of it is that we're overestimating our expenditures and this year, we're supposed to, correct me, Sherry, but we estimated spending 56 million. Last I heard, we're gonna spend 35.
Mm.
So that's I won't do the math. That's a
That's a
big number.
big
$20 million.
Big
Yes.
difference. If I was looking at the ending balance, which I've had to for assignments before at the state, whenever we saw something, whenever there was something where the economic story wasn't really explaining what was happening, it usually meant some policy decision happened. And so it could have been something from like you have let's say a community had a huge surplus right now and it was going to go down to 14.5 million, but maybe it should have been at 14.5 million because you underspent. Now you have to spend a little more and then you're getting back down to normal. But I don't know the history from, you'd have to go back 10 years and kind of look at some of these trends and identify where things delayed, which you're now having to pick up. Because right now we're just assuming that the current surplus is the magical perfect number.
Some of it is.
It
some
might
of
be,
it's delayed.
it just might be artificially lifted, or it could be you had fewer expenses before. And we already talked about the huge costs of materials and everything else from the different economic conditions happening across the country. So there's a piece of that surplus that's just going to go right out the door because of bad federal policy from the prior 4 years. And then a little bit of an overreaction that's happening right now that maybe should have occurred over a longer period of time. But aside from the politics, that's just how the economic numbers work out.
A lot of uncertainty here. I think there are going to be a lot of clean cars in Cave Creek in the next few years.
So as Jim was saying, so when they use 2% growth over the years, then at the bottom right number is 14 million. So a very big difference. And it seems like a small difference between the 4.6%, was it? And the 2%, but over time, it makes a very big difference. And so the long range forecast is a tool to help identify, like, where do we have some room to play? Where do we not have room to play? But over time, as we get closer and closer to those years, we have lots more information. We know, was there a recession? How severe was it? And our decisions are dynamic at whatever point in time that it is. So say we are heading into a recession, well, then maybe pay raises are 1%, 2%, or none. There's like, at least in my experience at other places where I've worked, where when you hit a recession area, then you're doing some freezes. So decisions are dynamic at the time to make sure that things stay in balance. It's not like we would just say, oh, Jim Brown's gave us this, we're going to plow ahead and that's exactly what we're going to do. It's just a tool to help us understand.
Wait, you're not? I'm kidding.
So I do have a question. We also asked for a couple of additional economic analyses, what Bike Week and the rodeo days,
I think it'll be May 5th.
May 5th. Perfect. Thank you.
Questions from council? Anybody want to pipe up? Okay, what's next?
This concludes the workshop if there's no further questions.
And I would just like to say, so kudos to the Rounds Consulting team because they were the last in the chain. And like, as I said, this is very much hot off the press, but I do want to say a lot of thanks to our other consultants as well. As Sean said, we've really put Kevin to the task of redoing the models over and over and over again.
He's used to, like he's saying, don't bail his head if he's worked here before.
Jim Strickland with Columbia Capital and working through some of the CIP projects and the financing plan and getting information from WIFA and all of that. And Kaylin, his cohort online, and Pat Walker's online, and she's been working with both teams.
I need to say hello to Pat. She's been here too. Hi, Pat. So do you have, do you have enough to move to the next step?
I believe so.
Okay. And the higher fire expenses were in there, correct? In our,
The
the
what?
numbers that we gave Jim were in the higher fire numbers for the new
Yes.
station. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, for the people in the audience who would like to comment, I'm going to stay after and we'll talk individually and give me and other council members may want to do the same thing. We didn't have any public comment, but we will stay after and give you a chance to.
Mayor, if it's just maybe one, I want to make sure that, you know, if you're talking about things that might actually come back at a later date, maybe it's just one person of the council that talks to the individuals, because I think you might have an open meeting potential violation.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's better just if it's you talking to individuals, if you want.
Maybe it sounds like wise advice.
That was my Bill hat.
Okay, any more business from council?
Just our gratitude to all the consultants.
Yeah.
Really did a good job.
Yeah, this is not easy. Okay, I guess if there's no further business, meeting adjourned. Thank you.